Welcome to our podcast, Chat with Junko and Bola. My name is Junko Yoshida, Editor-in-Chief of the Ojo-Yoshida Report. In each episode, we invite a subject matter expert for conversation. We ask probing questions to provide our listeners insight and clarity on the news of the moment.
The future of ADAS has never been brighter because when the capital is not being derailed to think of the holy grail, some of it's going to be reallocated. And with the safety issues we have on our roads, let's hope some of it at least, and some of this talent begins to develop the driver support features and the active safety features that can improve AEB, can improve reverse AEB, pedestrian detection, and level 2 features that improve both convenience and hopefully have ancillary safety benefits as well.
If there's one problem I would have those cruise machine learning experts work on is I've got a level 2+ system, want to be level 3, want to be 3+, whatever. The thing I need most is not a lane keeping algorithm. The thing I need most is realizing this machine learning is out of its depth and it's time to hand back to the user because it's about to make a randomly wrong decision. That's always been the Achilles heel for safety for all those things. And so in my mind, that's actually the big obstacle.
Well, thank you for coming to this sort of like a emergency podcast today at the Ojo-Yoshida Report. And just because GM announced this week that it's closing down Cruise. And as I said, I want to make this as a taking off point. This podcast is not about blaming Cruise, blaming GM. This podcast is about what we really learned in the robotaxi experience Cruise went through, and what does it mean to the future of ADAS and fully autonomous vehicle. So without further ado, we have two fantastic guests, Bryan Reimer and Phil Koopman. Hi guys.
Hi, Junko. Hi, Bola. Great to see you.
Yeah.
Hey, Junko. Hi, Bola.
Yeah, so with me, there's my partner, Bolaji Ojo, is in the same screen. And let's start from, well, we were just chatting before this podcast. GM shutting down Cruise came as no surprise to all of us, correct? Do we agree on that?
It's not shocking, that's for sure. It could have gone either way, but it's not shocking.
Why it is not shocking?
Well, I think the writing's been on the wall for a long time that robotaxi is a problematic business model, in part because the technology is so hard, and in part because you have to have a ton of money and a ton of patience for it to pay out. And people have been saying for years, well, we get a couple cities and then it'll go exponential because VCs love them some hockey stick curves, and it's going to be a city by city grind. And that has been obvious for a long time for people who are reading the tea leaves properly.
And I think built on that, Phil, is that driverless is not humanless. There's human capital all over the system, from teleoperations to sensor maintenance to software design, that is incredibly expensive talent. So you're displacing low cost, if not subsidized, rideshare drivers with high cost, high labor pool technology. And I think that folks are starting to understand that it's not a simple launch this product and it's going to work. As we've talked about together as a group before, the life cycle costs of this technology are probably even higher than the initial development costs. So I think the writing's been on the wall. And I think finally GM has done an analysis of the sunk costs and said, there's better places to put our capital in the future.
So let me disagree very slightly with that, Bryan. So what you said is true today. In the future, it might well be that the operating costs get lower because you don't need people to be intervening every 5 miles or every 10 miles, right? So that's growing pains. I think right now that's more a sign that they deployed the technology early, and it was very costly to operate because it isn't really mature. But longer term, from what GM's looking at, now, of course, we don't know what's in their minds. We know what they said, but we don't really know what's in their minds. But I'll hypothesize that they faced a choice, and this is perhaps overly reductionist, but they faced a choice. They could, it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years for this technology to mature to the point it's all over the country. And they could spend those 5, 10, 15, more than 10 is a researcher's way of saying we don't know, right? It's 10 plus years, 10 plus years. They could spend that 10 plus years spending billions on trying to run a robotaxi business, which is not their core business. Or they could spend those 10 years selling cars with at least some level of autonomy. So they could have 10 years of making money selling cars, or 10 years of money, 10 years spent
money.
losing money in robotaxis. That makes it kind of an easy choice for an OEM. Now, a Waymo is sort of in a different boat. We can get there, but for an OEM, that's a pretty straightforward choice.
I fully agree,
Yeah.
Phil. And I agree that the costs will go down, but the timeline to that is just unknown.
Yeah. Other than it's long, other than it's not.
It's long. And look, if you ask me what's the promise and how does this impact, and Junko, you open this a little bit, how does this impact the future of robotaxis? And to me, it's a non-issue, because sometime in the next century, well past my lifetime of worry, yeah, I think automation wins. We will find ways to solve this. The only question to me is, do we go back to near zero, and where these were really research programs for a while, as opposed to commercial deployments, before we come back up sometime in the distance? It's very much, that's the big question to me. How many decades until we solve some of these issues? But I am a believer in the technology over the long haul. And I think this is just a distant blip when we look back a century from now into history.
I wanted to follow up on what Phil started out with. You said, okay, they shut it down, but you also started by saying it could have gone the other way. I think Bryan was kind of alluding to that. Now, which other direction could it have gone? And what would have been the price to pay for that?
Look, GM could have decided we're going to double down on this. We're going to, pull capital out of our business from manufacturing vehicles or other, capital generating solutions, to try to fund this over 10, 15, 20 years. What would that do to their ability to manufacture cars? How does that play into the market long term? What's the viability of GM if it doesn't work out in 10 years? If you're a stockholder of GM, who in theory, the board and the CEO should report to, these are the type of questions you should be asking.
Yeah. Did they set it aside? Okay, here's our $10 billion war chest. Catch you in a few years when it's done. That's the kind of commitment it takes. It's going to be many billions of dollars, 5 or 10, and it's going to be city by city, grind. And you have to be very careful, because they've already had the one really bad mishap, and another one would probably be an existential threat to them. So they're sort of on probation. It's a huge amount of money. It's a huge long time, and for a company that can make money right now by selling cars, that's a big ask for the investors.
Yeah.
And Phil, I really agree with you, except on one point. I don't think it's 5 or 10 billion. I think it's magnitudes of that to get this scale.
Okay, more than 10 billion, a researcher has no idea.
Exactly,
but
it's just a.
Let me check my bank balance. No, I don't have that kind of money.
No, but it's not the kind of money that you can raise reasonably easier. It's the kind of money that you need a nation state government to put in. It's also the kind of money that I question whether Alphabet can fork over to support Waymo at a time where the mothership, Google, is under threat through Gen AI and other approaches.
Yeah. Well, didn't they just commit 5 billion? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, and that only gets Waymo a year and a half down the road.
But the money's not even in the bank, right? So that they could change their mind. So jury's still out on Waymo. Right now, Waymo's going city by city. They're doing the grind, and they have not had their bad mishap yet. And I'm not trying to be negative here. If you're out on the road, public road, eventually there will be a bad crash. Even if you're 10 times better than the human driver, you will eventually have the bad crash, right?
Absolutely.
It's not anywhere near time for Waymo to have had theirs, but eventually it will happen. And the question when that happens is, will they have enough trust in the figurative public trust bank that people say, well, things happen, as opposed to, what do you mean? You guys weren't paying attention. So we're going to see how that plays out. And we don't know if they're going to get unlucky and it happens early, or lucky and it happens late. But when that happens, we're going to find out how it goes with Waymo. Cruise had their moment, and we just found out how it turned out. It turned out that way. Remember, Too Simple had that bad crash. No one even got hurt, but they had a bad crash. they're gone. Uber ATG had a fatality, they're gone. The the trend is not positive. So if I'm Waymo, what I take away from this is you better not make a mistake because you kind of only get one and then, but it isn't even one. Everyone who's had the bad crash hasn't made it. So, I'd be really paying attention to double down on safety if I'm Waymo. And I'm not saying they're not taking safety seriously. It's just there's a lesson for Waymo here, which is you don't even get the one bad crash, not really.
So Phil, I firmly agree with you, and I'll take it one step further. I think it's also Waymo is under operational pressure to expand fast. Fast
Yes.
movement increases risk.
Yep.
But I think yesterday's events actually set the tone very differently. I think they create a bigger issue for Alphabet in raising the funding, call it 10 billion plus, to carry Waymo forward for the next 5 years. So, okay, if you're an outside investor, you're getting even more skittish based upon all what we're talking about here, one and done, even if you can get to two. Once you get to that one mishap, everybody's going to be asking questions and pointing fingers. So I think the ability to raise money got a whole lot more difficult yesterday. And I don't see self-driving vehicles as a technology race anymore. I think we'll solve the technology. It's hard as heck. There's a lot of unknowns, but I see it as a funding runway race. Who
Yeah.
can who can build a runway to Mars?
Okay.
And to be clear, when you say self-driving, you mean robotaxi with no person behind the wheel, because self-driving is this ambiguous, amorphous thing.
Yeah.
But yes, right.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one question. Before this discussion, we said that, well, should we bring Tesla into this discussion? And some people think that Tesla doesn't have this place in the discussion, but I think it does. Part of the reason is not that Tesla is advanced or behind, but Tesla has proven to have a way of persuading the public, but as long as blaming the human drivers, they can claim that autonomy is just around the corner. They have played this game long enough and they have not been punished for it, at least as far as I understand. And I was wondering if the events like yesterday, GM's decision to sack the crews, has anything to do with anything with what Tesla is trying to, tell the world, oh, don't worry about it. This thing is going to come and we're doing great things and we'll survive.
Junko, I think in particular, I'll start here. Tesla to date has blamed the operator. The operator should have been paying attention. The operator should have done this. The operator should have done that. As soon as they pull the operator out of the vehicle, and we see ads now already coming out, leaked in the news where Tesla's trying to hire teleoperators. As soon as they pull the driver with the driver's license out of the cab, if they do not have a level of safety that well exceeds that of Cruise, and at least meets that of where Waymo has been, I think a lot of questions are going to start to be asked of, okay, can we allow these cars to hit things on the road? If the robotaxi model at Tesla behaves anything like the full self-driving model of Tesla, the number of incidences will be so high that governmental involvement, even with Musk involved in the administration, will function. Maybe it floats to the states, maybe it floats to the localities, maybe it floats to people putting cones on the front of the cars. Some kind of government or quasi-government involvement is going to say, not in my backyard, darn it.
So a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago at the end of 2022, Junko and Bola, you had me on, and I said my prediction was level 2 plus 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 was going to be what's happening.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sure enough, that's where we are, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking at, so I have a slightly different take than Bryan, but I think we're not far apart. It's just a different take. The what we're seeing is the era of the robotaxi is getting pretty thin, and
Yes.
eventually, maybe Waymo can get the funding to see it through. We're going to see, but there are a few organizations. Maybe Amazon has enough money; they're willing to sink into Zooks. But unless you've got a big giant sugar daddy with lots of money and lots of patience, it's not happening for you. What's everyone else going to do? And maybe those guys eventually too. They're going to go to the drivers responsible for safety, because that way they don't have to be perfect. They can just blame the driver for not paying attention. And when I said level 2 plus plus plus, and I'm on that committee for that standard. I understand that's a sin to even say level 2 plus. I get it. But what I mean by that is incrementally saying, well, we're going to tell everyone the regulators is level 2, so we're not regulated, because all the regulations apply to level 3 and above, other than reporting and recalls. We're going to tell everyone it's level 2, which means the driver's responsible, but we're going to asymptotically approximate a robotaxi. So the customer's buying a robotaxi, but they're supposed to pay attention, and somehow we're going to make that work. And Tesla excels at that, as you mentioned.
Yes.
But when you listen to what GM was saying on the call, that's basically their plan. And someday they'll be at level 4, but no day soon.
Mary Barra even said that level 3 plus.
I don't know if she misspoke. It was real. But the thing with level 3, what we've seen from like Mercedes-Benz is it isn't really level 3, not strictly.
Right.
It's level 3, you can watch the dashboard, but tort liability and criminal liability are still your problem. So by strict definition, that's really level 2, right? So it's going to be, yeah, it's okay, but you have to kind of sort of pay attention. And by the way, there's a crash, that's your problem, right? And we're going to see that for an extended many, many years. That's going to be the playbook, is find a way to blame the driver. Now, the car companies who are trying to do the right thing are going to be reluctant to play the blame the driver car, and they will hopefully produce excellent technology that really is really good. But the final backstop is going to be, but there was a driver there, and they should have been doing X, Y, Z. That's where I think we're going. And Tesla can use that playbook still. Even with a cybercab, they can use that playbook. And all the other companies are clearly going down that path.
Now, I do think the holy grail to automation in maybe in my lifetime, 30, 40 years out down there, hopefully.
I know. I got a few years on you, Brian. I don't think I'm going to see it, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Way out there.
I certainly hope to, but
it is a level 4 feature under certain conditions that I am able to turn on the highway, which is a much easier operating environment, that I am truly allowed to go out of the loop until some point that somehow a modern, much more comfortable shock therapy wakes me up and ensures that I'm there to transition this. Now, how that plays out over decades, I think there are so many unknowns. You say the automation control is so much easier than the human integration. But I think that is, in essence, what is, the feature of interest to many of us. We're not, I live 2 hours north of the office. A robotaxi does nothing for me. What I want is to get on the highway, switch on a button, and take a nap. Now, I do think over the long haul, we'll figure this out. The question only is how many decades. And I think that's what GM was alluding to in here, is at the end of the day, they nixed the Ultra Cruise model, which is something more synergistic or at least discussed more synergistically to full self-driving, of a feature that would do some kind of automated navigation in cities. And I suspect at the end of the day, what we're looking for and what Mercedes is hoping to move towards is, let's call it highway pilot for ease. That at some point, quite frankly, can figure out how to transition responsibility reasonably assured between the human and the machine. So that way, when I drove to the office today and it is absolute torrential rain out there and no automation system wants to own this liability, it's geofenced off at that point. But when it's a beautiful sunny day and everything's running great, I can now use this feature. The question is, will we pay for it as a subscription model? How long will it last? Where would it be? All lots of questions. I think that's what the holy grail is. In essence, is Phil calls it level 2 plus 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 plus. It's a shared responsibility model of, the human's responsible for using it when it's supposed to be, but it really does, when it's on, take all the driving responsibility away from the human, which is kind of that L4 feature, as I call it, which again, the J3016 model doesn't necessarily fully
Yeah,
allow.
that's supposed to be what level 3 is, but everyone's twisting that one around. So I call that baby level 4. That in my mind, the only safe level 3 is in fact a baby level 4. And the idea is if you're either driving or it's telling you you're on standby, and if you're on standby, it calls for your attention. It's still got the safety ball until you have time to reengage, and that is probably longer than 10 seconds. And if you look closely, if it's able to mitigate risk during the takeover, strictly speaking, that meets the definition of level 4. So, maybe when Mary Barra said level 3 plus, that's what she was talking about. Maybe she meant level 2 plus and misspoke. I don't know, but we're going to find out. But to build on what you said, Bryan, the thing that is viable is, I think, in the medium term, is what you said, which is something that takes over segments of rides. But it has, for it to not be level 2 plus plus plus, it has to be one. They have to accept tort liability, not just product liability. They have to accept tort liability. We have to deal with what's going to happen with criminal liability if there's a crash, right? But the liability has to shift onto the company, not the driver. You have to literally, they may tell you not to go to sleep, but if you fall asleep, the car's still got the ball until you wake up and take over. They don't get to say, "Oh, you didn't do what we told you, so it's your fault." No, 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 no. It's gotta actually have it 100% till there's a changeover to the human driver that's not performed under duress to the human. That's the holy grail. I'm just being a little more precise about it. I think it's what you were saying. Yeah.
Absolutely, Phil. And I think it's the human cannot be a fallback ready user. It's the human's got to have given the responsibility of the automation until they are capable of stepping it back.
Yeah. And now there's some nuance here. You could say, hey, human, we want you to stay awake. We want you to be engaged. We're going to play you a movie to try and keep you awake. And we have field data that shows 93%, I'm making up a number of the time, that people can take over in 10 seconds. We're going to use that statistically in a risk formulation, but we're not going to hang you out to dry if you're in that other 7%. It's perfectly fine to do a portfolio approach of different drivers and different risks and different outcomes, and you achieve acceptable safety. What you can't do is say, there's a line convenient for the manufacturer to draw, and if the human driver goes over the line, it's their fault. You can't do that.
But that's more likely to happen.
That is inevitable to happen until the technology matures and some company gets good enough they're willing to actually take the liability. And then that's going to be a game changer for the whole industry when some company is willing to cross that line. But it's not anytime soon, other than true Waymo robotaxi kind of things. But if we're talking individually owned cars, that's what's off.
No, I think that the other thing that
kind of shift is, sorry, Bryan, I wanted to shift this and look at it from the non-Western automotive market. Look at China, all of the promises and things that seem to be coming out of there. It looks like they may actually shave some decades, if the reports are true, from your projections and expectations.
Well, we'll see. That the Chinese robotaxi companies are not 3 meters tall, despite what you hear in the press. They all have, from all appearances, every single car has a full-time remote operator with a steering wheel and controls. And it's basically, there's a safety driver there, but it's a telepresent safety driver rather than vehicle safety driver in there. And I believe they're treating them, from a regulatory point of view, they're treating them as if they're in the car. They're tasked with that same level of responsibility.
And look, I think that at the end of the day, the liability sides in China are a lot different than the US. So our ability to accept 1 or 2 per X million a mile issues is just phenomenal, just far and away different. So if a robotaxi only had to be as safe as you and I, it's a lot easier problem than it has to be 10 times safer than you and I for us to accept it.
Or it could be twice as dangerous. And if they decide that risk is worth it for public benefit, so be it. The numbers, human drivers are not, despite all the crazy driving you see, people are good at avoiding crashes, even despite crazy driving. The numbers are actually not that bad on an absolute basis. So if you're twice as dangerous, and you have a permissive regulatory environment, that's one every 50 million miles. That's a lot of miles, right? I'm not saying I want them to be more dangerous. I'm just being pragmatic here.
Yeah.
You could have a public policy that says the benefit of robotaxi so outweighs everything else, willing to accept a slightly higher fatality rate as long as it's not crazy high. You could see that too.
I think the economic trends overall, I mean, you see a pullback in the mobility space, around the world at the moment, in different ways in different continents. But I think the pullback in spending in the entire mobility space is going to vastly change the landscape of automation, active safety, electrification over the next several years. How this all plays out will be very interesting, but the automakers as well as the tech companies need to get much more strategic in their deployment of capital to get over what's going to be a rough hump of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. How some of the political changes in Washington exacerbate or accelerate exacerbate expenditures or accelerate savings. Who knows? But I think that the landscape looks a lot different, and the players are going to get much more strategic in how they allocate the capital.
Yeah. Well, the simple version is free money. We're past free money.
You're past
And
the
if you want to,
free
if
money.
you're going to blow 10 million on a 10 billion, excuse me, $10 billion on a robotaxi experiment, free money is the time you want to do that. And that's not where we are anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this, that one of the questions I kept asking over the years is that are there two paths that car makers have been following? One path for ADAS, the other path is the robotaxi. In terms of technology, I'm not talking about economics, but in terms of technology, are they overlap? Are there something that the GM will be able to leverage what Cruise has done with full autonomy, or actually there isn't really that much?
I mean, look, there's absolutely some learning overlap. I mean, it's not both sides of the equation, but it isn't this either.
Yeah.
I think that many of the engineers Cruise had working on level four dreams are going to say, I like this vision of autonomy, et cetera, and go to personal robotics or going to home robotics or some other area of robotics.
A
There
lot
are
of the
some
folks
that
like
they are.
have already done that. Yeah, a lot of folks have already done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there is going to be a talent loss in this area. And GM's probably hoping for that because they probably need to cut some of that talent. But I think what yesterday told us is it's increasing levels of automation in the vehicle from the bottom up that is clearly the preferred path among the masses. And the top-down approach, well, the number of players shrank by one.
Yeah. Well, and that could have worked if they were successful in 2 or 3 or 4 years like they planned. And lots of us always thought it was going to be longer than that. But the investors bought the story and they saw how that turned out.
Now, my biggest advice to the folks left in this market is to start thinking more strategically in their capital spend. Bigger is not necessarily more efficient or closer to developing the economies of scale that are required to actually find a product that can move from the red to the black. So Waymo just announced the other day, and they're going to Miami, is really spending some amount of money per mile traveled per trip for more trips, going to get you to the point of a positive revenue stream faster? Or is at the end of the day, staying smaller, nimbler, and focusing on the operational effectiveness to get the cost down going to be an easier way to get there? And I think Zoot's model of staying smaller deployment, smaller focused, manageable within Amazon's budget is likely to be more successful than bigger is better.
Yeah,
Bigger needs more money, and we're not talking about a dollar or two. We're talking billions. So if I had to pick winners here, it's Zoot's. Amazon can afford a $500 million a year for the next 10 years to deliver packages more effectively. Maybe people as well. but can Alphabet afford $3-4 billion a year for the next 10 years, given all the other pressures?
It's interesting that neither of you is focusing on let's improve the technology, let's focus on the technology. Neither of you is talking about that. You're looking more at how much will this cost before it gets to that point. Are
Well,
we saying that
the technology has to improve, Bola, obviously, or else they'd be in all the cities already. But it's becoming clear that the current technology approaches are not just going to magically exponentially scale up. It's going to be a long engineering grind. And I think the technology, I think we're still one breakthrough away, really. But if you brute force it with enough money, you can get there. And let me tell you my prediction. There's two predictions for what that is. And one of them goes back to the question about what does GM do with the cruise folks, okay? One thing that I've been saying forever is that it's the heavy tail edge cases that get you. And machine learning is kind of the wrong technology to deal with edge cases because it's all about the typical case, and the rare cases are hard. And as you go to each city, there's more edge cases, and that's why it's a grind. But to go back to if I were at GM and I had all these cruise machine learning experts, and they during the call they said, well, something something end to end, something something large language models. Who knows what that means, right? It could mean almost anything. But those are means to the end. If what you're really interested in is in graduating from level 2 to level 3 to level 4, like they said, by the way, they always said that was impossible. Now, I don't know. I try not to be snarky here, but now all of a sudden it's possible, I guess, right? We're going to see. But what's the thing that's missing? There's actually a technical issue that makes that happen, which is it has to be good at knowing when it doesn't know. So back before, when Bryan and I were talking about it only works within an ODD, the challenge is knowing when you got out of your ODD for a reason you didn't think of. And so if there's one problem I would have those cruise machine learning experts work on is I've got a level 2 plus system, want to be level 3, want to be 3 plus whatever. The thing I need most is not a lane keeping algorithm. The thing I need most is realizing this machine learning is out of its depth and it's time to hand back to the user because it's about to make a randomly wrong decision. That's always been the Achilles heel for safety for all those things. And so in my mind, that's actually the big obstacle.
And Phil, I'll add to that. I think the whole area, and Junko and Bola, we've talked about this before, of driver support is an area that is desperate need of innovation and investment. Is that, handing over to the human suggests the human is alert, engaged enough that they can take that. And it's not about assuming they're there. It's about supporting them in a way to ensure that they're there. And I think there is an enormous amount of potential in that area. So I
Okay,
think
so
that,
I'll give you two. There's two things they need to work on. The first one is knowing when they don't know, and the second is making sure the human is as attentive as the driver needs to be for their operational concept,
bingo.
which all depends on what your operational concept is. Yeah, that's a good point. So okay, so there's two things that they need to get from those excellent machine learning folks at Cruise that they just have netted in this transfer.
So, Phil, the hard part is I think the behavioral one of how to support the drivers comes from a fusion of a little of the machine learning side, a lot of human factors, and a lot of human-centered design. That's not the folks they just let go of. So I
Ah,
think
Well,
that's a
GM
whole area.
has some folks, has some of the human. I mean, by all accounts, Super Cruise has done a much better job than everyone else. So we're going to see.
Yeah, but remember that most of the original team who did build Super Cruise that's still on the road today is no longer at GM.
Well,
So
that's a problem.
that's a
That's a
huge problem.
problem.
Okay, I know too many of them. The brilliant minds that built what I consider still to be one of, if not the best assistive packages on the road. It's the same package it was when it was released in 2018. The folks who made those decisions and did about 10 years worth of work, most of them aren't at GM anymore. A couple of them retired, a couple of them have moved to different companies. So I think there's a lot of innovation that's needed there, but the future of ADAS has never been brighter
mm,
because when the capital is not being derailed to think of the holy grail, some of it's going to be reallocated. And with the safety issues we have on our roads, let's hope some of it at least, and some of this talent begins to develop the driver support features and the active safety features that can improve AEB, can improve reverse AEB, pedestrian detection, and yeah, level 2 features that improve both convenience and hopefully have ancillary safety benefits as well.
Yeah. That's a hopeful message, right?
Hope.
Hopefully the money goes to the people who are developing technology to support drivers. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts? Or you have a question, Bola?
No, I think both Phil and Bryan, you've kind of explored everything. It's just this question of 3-4 decades from now that's a bit scary. I mean, this is something I hope will happen like 5-10 years from now.
Yeah,
it's not going to. And I'll close with this. OpenAI just released a search engine last month that a bunch of us have switched over to. It's a revenue model that right now is based upon me subscribing to OpenAI's products, but is pulling ad revenue away from Alphabet. If 10% of us switch search, what is the impact to Alphabet? If what OpenAI released is phenomenal, and 50% of us move towards it, does it completely alter the current advertising market that is driven and fueled this space race to self-driving? So I think where self-driving, high automated vehicles, however we want to place the words of what Reimer right now, I think the capital required to do it is tied up in search and how search plays out over the next 3 to 12 months. Because if OpenAI is successful, the money train for Alphabet is vastly different over the next several years. I think the auto companies are going to be under significant product innovation pressure, how to reduce cost, how to innovate. I just hope they keep focusing enough on leveraging what we've learned over the last decade and applying that to supporting all 4 of us.
And for my end, on the driver support, the level 2, the leveling, I'm going to call it leveling up, like a video game, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, right? The leveling up exercise, especially if the car companies are hurting, which they are lately, there's going to be tremendous, there's a moral hazard here, tremendous pressure to do shiny, cool stuff and sort of not on purpose make it unsafe, but it's so easy to slip into, oh, surely the driver will be able to X, Y, Z. And we don't have the money for the human subject studies. It'll be fine. And then you find out drivers really can't do the impossible thing you're asking them to do. And so we've seen some of that, but I'm concerned that, and I think it's likely, at least for a year or two, we're going to see sort of a race to the bottom on safety versus shiny features. And that's something I hope the industry can get its arms wrapped around before things go in the wrong direction. Because this technology should be helping us with safety. It shouldn't be the other way around.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to the show. It was a lot of fun, and well, it's not a lot of fun for GM or Cruise, but I think it is. They showed us the glimpse of the future and what the industry needs to be doing. So thanks for your opinions, and we'll see you soon. Have a happy holiday.
You too,
Happy
Junko.
holidays.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to our latest chat with Junko and Bola. Register at www.Ojo-Yoshida Report.com and you will have free access for your first 2 months to in-depth news and analysis that you can't find anywhere else.